So when we do, when we try to picture what happens, of course we still have our stack memory. This is where all the local variables are created. We have our heap, which we're not using right now. We also have globals, okay, global variables. And so the global variables are declared, outside of any function. When a variable is created and declared outside of any function, and I mean outside the body of this function, right? It gets stored in the global section, not in the stack, but in the global section of this program. And of course, we have our text, which is the executable code that goes there, okay? And so you can trust me, anytime I see in someone else's code a global variable like this, I immediately think of it as being placed in this memory segment for globals. What's the significance of it? Well, the significance of it is that its visibility and its life cycle is the longest possible that you can have in your program, meaning that global variables exist even before main is invoked. Many people think that main function in C or C++ or main method in your Java code is the first ever possible thing that gets to execute in your code. But no, the first things that may be executed are like, code associated with global variables. So global variables are very simple idea. They placed in this special memory. So this is where I'm going to have my variable age placed, right? This variable is initialized with some value 0 to begin with, and it's placed here in global area, and this is where its location is. So this is why they're called global, because they're globally available. Their intention is to be available to any function which can possibly see this global variable, which is pretty much almost, with some restrictions, like almost any place in your code. Some extra effort may be needed when you have multiple source files in your application, but you can always make global variables available to any function. But the important part to note here is that their life cycle, their lifetime, their creation is not linked to any function, and they're called global variables. Now, object-oriented programming in general views global variables as a threat to your health, your well-being, and your future. Okay, and I'm talking about the code, hopefully, right? So the idea is that because they're so widely accessible, there's absolutely no enforcement on how to use global variables. Think about the local variable. When we say local variable, which we would create here, right? We could say right here, we could say integer x equals 1, 2, 3, and that would be a local variable inside main function. And we have some restrictions on x. We said that x is limited, its life cycle is limited to the duration of the call to main. That's good to know. Additionally, it can be used only inside main, right? So if I had some other function named foo over here, and it would try to access x and say x equals 4, 5, 6, change its value. If it hasn't been declared in the scope of foo, it's going to be a compiler error, right? Because the compiler has no idea what x is. So it's not going to happen. So it's actually good to have restrictions in software. The more restrictions you have in software, the more enforcement of some rules which are very common. The more of these enforcements you have, the safer your code becomes. But unlike X, if I wanted to use, if I wanted to say age, right? I'll just write over it. if I wanted to use age, which is basically saying, use this global variable in this function age and change its value, it's not restricted. Global variables are available to any place in your code at any time. Okay? And because of that, it's very easy to not just use them, but misuse them. In fact, there is no way that anyone in this project, in the software, can control the way global variables are changed. Are there any rules? You can write a book about rules, how to use it, but there's no way to enforce it, right? You can only go back to the code and verify that the way a global variable was used is exactly according to some rule that you said we all should have. So there's no enforcement on the compiler side. And when you look at this sample right here, function foo, that seems to be making attempt to change variable age, it may seem to be relatively innocent because so what? Okay, it's just another variable and it's another change in that variable. But imagine that you have hundreds of places where age is modified. And if you are asked to find a specific place which is responsible for, making sure it gets computed according to some formula, you have to examine 100 places in that program to find 5 of them which seem to be doing, you think, exactly that, using that specific formula, right? If there aren't too many comments in that program that explain what happens, you are in a pretty difficult position to use your own judgment against the usage of global variables. Now, it's not uncommon for those variables to change in 100 places. Now, imagine that compound on top of that, you have 100 of global variables, which are also involved in interaction with that specific variable you're trying to investigate, understand, or even make a change. Now you have to multiply 100 variables, could potentially be changed in 100 places, and you get 10,000 of potential, places to worry about. That's completely overwhelming, right? So if this was completely unnecessary to keep a variable age global and instead bring it back to the scope of main function, it's probably a much better choice, because then maybe this was used as a temporary value, right? And therefore it may be a better choice to create another temporary integer and keep them completely separate, right? And don't make everything use just the same variable over and over and over and over again, because this may render the entire application extremely difficult to use and maintain. But since we're looking at those very basic features of the language, we have to mention global variables. And nowadays, any usage of global variables, unless this is something very, very well documented and used only with great care, usually any global variable in today's software development, especially in object-oriented environments, is viewed as some kind of a design flaw, that there was an improperly designed application. You probably don't want someone telling someone else that you were involved in a project which had, incorrect design. That just doesn't sound too good. All right, question.